Today I'm going back to something I used to do quite a lot, which was make videos about Magic the Gathering, and in particular, showing off some of the decks that I've built. I have a lot of Commander deck lists here on the channel, although they're a bit old now. So today I'm going to go through one that I don't think I've done before, and that is Teshar, Ancestor's Apostle. This is one of my favorite decks. It's a very interesting deck that does something different than most other decks. So, Teshar, Ancestor's Apostle is from Dominaria, and I have this foil that I believe I opened during the Dominaria pre-release. And Teshar is 3 and a white for a 2/2 legendary creature, bird cleric. He has flying, and whenever you cast a historic spell, return target creature card with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. And then as a reminder, artifacts, legendaries, and sagas are historic. So this deck is built around artifacts, which are historic, and then a bunch of small creatures with a prioritization on artifact creatures and small creatures that can sacrifice for something, and then you can get it back. So that's what this deck is all built around. The main struggle I have with it is a good win condition, because I can't cheat out my win conditions, really. I have to have some big finishers, and those do not generally cost 3 or less. So I just kind of have to outlast my opponents until then. So I've already organized the deck by creatures, artifacts, instant sorceries, enchantments, lands. So we're going to start with creatures, where we have a creature that exemplifies the ideals of this deck. It is both a historic spell and a creature with mana cost 3 or less. So it is everything that Teshar wants. Filigree Familiar, 3 mana for a 2/2 artifact creature. When it enters the battlefield, you gain 2 life, and when it dies, you draw a card. This is perfect. You get value upon entering, value upon dying, and it satisfies both of Teshar's needs. So this is a great card to start with. Next we have Fiend Hunter. It's a 3 mana creature. Very few creatures in this deck are going to be over 3 mana. And when it enters, you can exile something until it leaves the battlefield. So a great target to get back in order to take care of a threat. Adorned Pouncer is a 2 mana 1/1 with double strike, but you can eternalize it into a 4/4 token for 5 mana. This deck just does a lot with the graveyard, so having something in the graveyard, being able to do something from the graveyard is going to be useful. I wouldn't exactly call this a finisher, but it kind of counts. Boreas Charger, another 3 mana creature. This time it has flying, and when it leaves the battlefield, you choose an opponent who controls more lands than you, and you search your library for a number of planes equal to the difference and put them onto the battlefield. Put 1 onto the battlefield tapped, and the rest into your hand. So of course, white's classic problems, card draw and ramp. Card draw is not a problem in this deck. Ramp is fine, but not amazing. This card can help with that, but it's nothing incredible. Felidar Cub is a 2 mana creature that can sacrifice to destroy an enchantment. This is one of those cards that getting back every turn, or several times a turn, can be very useful. There's no need to play disenchant effects when we have some on creatures, although it does only hit enchantments. Scarecrow is a recent addition that I actually didn't know existed. It is a 3 mana artifact creature, so once again satisfies Teshar's requirements. You can sacrifice a Scarecrow to draw a card, which in this case, this is the only Scarecrow in the deck, I'm pretty sure. But it can sack itself to draw. But you can pay 4 and tap it to return an artifact creature card from your graveyard to play. So just a little bit more of bringing artifacts back. Junk Diver is incredibly good. It's a 3-mana artifact creature with flying. When it dies, you return another artifact card from your graveyard to your hand, which kind of lets you loop things. So it dies, you get a cheap artifact. You play that artifact, you get Junk Diver back onto the battlefield. You get another trigger from Teshar, bring back something small, get another artifact. Yeah, it's good. Here is the primary finisher for the deck. It's a 7-mana artifact creature, so it does not cannot be brought back from the graveyard with Teshar, but it is a mere Battle Sphere, a 4/7 artifact creature, and when it enters the battlefield, you make 4/1/1 mere artifact creature tokens. And whenever it attacks, you can tap X untapped mirror you control, and mirror Battle Sphere gets +X/+O and deals X damage to the player it's attacking. So pretty decent artifact-based finisher. Professor of Symbology is a 2-mana creature, and when it enters the battlefield, learn. There's no sideboard in Commander, so that you're not getting any lessons. But you can discard a card to draw a card, which is not quite white card draw, but it does help, and it's something that we can get back from the graveyard. Avid Mind Sensor is another 3-mana creature. It has flash and flying, and if an opponent would search a library, that player searches the top 4 cards instead. This is just a little control card to keep things under control. But it's something that can keep coming back, which is the main point. White Mane Lion is 2 mana, and when it enters, you can return a creature you control to its owner's hand. This is kind of just a way to get Teshar triggers. We play this, return a historic creature to our hand, play that creature, get something back from the graveyard, stuff like that. Scrap Trawler is a 3-mana artifact creature. When it or another artifact you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, return to your hand a target artifact card in your graveyard with lesser converted mana cost. So when this dies, or another artifact dies, we get a cheaper artifact from the graveyard back to our hand. Which, of course, if we then play that, and Teshar is out, we can get the Scrap Trawler back. So, lots of loops in this deck, which is a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun to play, even if it's not winning. Revelark is a 5-mana creature, but it's a 4/3 with flying, and when it dies, you return 2 target creature cards with power 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. So it's just another recursion spell, even though it does not work with Teshar. You can also evoke it for 6 mana. Similar to that, actually, is Vesperlark. It is a 3-mana creature with flying, and when it leaves the battlefield, you can return a creature card with power 1 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield, and it has Evoke for 2 mana. So these 2 cards are just useful for getting creatures back, and all of our creatures are small. One of those creatures we may want to get back is Mirror Retriever, a 2-mana artifact creature, and when it dies, you return another target artifact card from your graveyard to your hand. Lots of looping, lots of bringing things back. Murdered Rusalka is a 1-mana creature. You can pay a white and sacrifice a creature, including itself, and target creature can't attack this turn. So if we're not really doing anything, this is one of those cards we can use to both fill our graveyard. It's a cheap sacrifice outlet, and it is a way to stem the bleeding from a large creature. Keening Apparition is the same as Veladar Cup that we looked at earlier. 2-mana creature, sacrifice it to destroy an enchantment. So, just useful to have around for destroying powerful enchantments. Scrapyard Recombiner. It's a 3-mana artifact creature with modular 2. So it enters with 2 +1/+1 counters. This is a good target for Vesperlark, because 0 power. You can tap it and sacrifice an artifact to search for a construct card, reveal it, and put it into your hand. A lot of the artifact creatures in this deck are, just happen to be constructs, including Mirror Battlesphere, actually. I didn't really realize that, but yeah, Mirror Battlesphere is a mirror construct, which actually combos well with this. We can search for our finisher, and sacrificing an artifact is completely fine by us. Kithion, Hero of Akros. 1 mana legendary creature, which legendary counts as historic, so he is a very cheap Teshar enabler. That's mostly why he's here, but you can pay 3 to give him indestructible, and at the end of combat, if him and at least 2 other creatures attacked this combat, you exile him and return him to the battlefield transformed. And he comes back as a Planeswalker. Gideon Battleforged, who has 3 loyalty. You can +2 and up to 1 target creature and opponent controls attacks Gideon during its next turn if able. +1 until your next turn, target creature gains indestructible. Untap it. And then you can pay 0 to turn him into a 4/4 with indestructible. So, a little bit of Planeswalker utility, but definitely mostly here for the cheap historic enabler. Cataclysmic Gearhulk. It's a 5 mana artifact creature. 4/5 vigilance, and it's a bit of a board wipe. When it enters the battlefield, each player chooses an artifact, creature, enchantment, and a planeswalker from among permanents they control, and then they sacrifice the rest. So it's not a complete board wipe, but it's something, and we don't mind sacrificing things. Thraben Inspector. 1 white mana for a creature. When it enters the battlefield, investigate, which makes a blue token, so just a little bit more artifacts, some slow card draw, and we got this one in foil. Thraben Inspector, one of my favorite cards, and somehow not in foil, is Daxos, Blessed by the Sun. Not a foil. I should get a foil of it though. Daxos is 2 white mana for a legendary enchantment creature. His toughness is equal to your devotion to white, and whenever another creature you control enters the battlefield or dies, you gain 1 life. So not only is he legendary, but also we're going to be gaining a lot of life from all the little creatures that we have entering and leaving the battlefield. Shimmermere is a 3 mana artifact creature with flash, and you can cast artifact spells with flash, which is just quite helpful for getting things back from the graveyard as a surprise when Teshar is out. As you can see, a lot of this depends on Teshar being out, but I think the cards do enough on their own and have enough loops without Teshar that the deck can survive until it gets to enough mana to recast him. Bygone Bishop is a 3 mana creature with flying, and when you cast a creature spell with mana cost 3 or less, investigate. We will be casting a lot of cheap creatures, and investigating will help us draw cards. Stonecoil Serpent is an artifact creature that costs X. Comes in with X +1/+1 counters. It has reach, trample, and protection from multicolored. Depending on the state of the game, this could be a way to help us win. In a pinch, though, it is a 0 mana artifact. So, it serves a couple purposes for sure. It can be big, or it can just instantly die. Nautilus Bodyguard. 1 white mana for a creature. When it enters the battlefield, you choose a creature you control, and then you can sacrifice the bodyguard to give that creature indestructible. Just a nice little protection, perhaps, for Teshar. This is my newest addition to the deck from the Forgotten Realms set. We have Oswald Fiddlebender. 1 and a white for a 2/2 legendary creature, Gnome Artificer. So we got that legendary for historic. And his ability, Magical Tinkering. You pay a white, tap him, and sacrifice an artifact. Search your library for an artifact card with mana value equal to 1, plus the sacrificed artifact's mana value. Put it onto the battlefield. So this This lets us search up something useful and sacrifices things. Everything this deck wants to do. Joyra's Familiar. 4 mana for a 2/2 with flying. It's an artifact creature, and historic spells that we cast cost 1 less, which is great. There are some cards that make artifact spells cost less, which I do believe we have one. But historic is a little more broad. Actually, I think I have a foil of this, but I'm just using a regular one in this deck. Oh yeah, and here is that other card, Foundry Inspector. 3 mana artifact creature. Artifact spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. Pilgrim's Eye is a bit of a ramp and fixing card. You can pay 3 mana, and it costs 3 mana for an artifact creature, 1/1 flying, and when it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, put it into your hand. Inspiring Statuary is 3 mana for an artifact. Non-artifact spells you cast have improvise. So that just means that this becomes a mana rock, and other artifacts also become mana rocks. Crafted War Gear is 3 mana for artifact equipment. Equipped creature gets +3/+2, and whenever it becomes unattached from a permanent, sacrifice that permanent and equip for 0. So this is a good way to kill any artifacts that we want to get back. Pretty useful. Lightning Greaves, pretty self-explanatory. Good card. 2 mana for an artifact equipment. Equipped creature has haste and shroud. Equip for 0. We shouldn't be targeting Teshar with anything, so shroud works pretty well and will help protect him. Ichor Wellspring is 2 mana for an artifact. When it enters the battlefield or is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, draw a card. So this one, we have to have a sacrifice outlet, but that shouldn't be too hard to do. We also have Mycosynth Wellspring, which is the same thing, but when it enters the battlefield or is put into a graveyard, we search for a basic land and put it into our hand. I guess we're not in creatures anymore, by the way. Now we have some mana artifacts, such as Soul Ring. 1 mana artifact, taps for 2 colorless. Gotta have it. Culling Deus, 2 mana for an artifact. Tap and sacrifice a creature to put a charge counter on it. Pay 1 and sacrifice it to draw a card for each charge counter on it. So if we need to sacrifice some creatures, we can do that and then cash them in for cards. Endless Atlas, 2 mana for an artifact. Pay 2 and tap it to draw a card. Activate this ability only if you control 3 or more lands with the same name. Since we're in a mono white deck, we will certainly have 3 planes pretty easily. That's a good way to draw cards in a white deck. Ingenuity Engine is a 7 mana artifact with Cascade. Unfortunately, we could get something like 1 mana off of that, but that's fine. Because we can pay 1 and tap it and sacrifice an artifact to return target artifact you control to its owner's hand, which is a great way to get that sacrificed artifact back again. Lotus Bloom, suspend 3 for 0 mana, tap and sacrifice it to add 3 mana of any 1 color. Just a little bit of mana ramp when we need it, and it is a historic spell. Soul Guide Lantern is a 1 mana artifact, and when it enters the battlefield, exile target card from a graveyard. You can tap it and sacrifice it to exile each opponent's graveyard, or you can pay 1, tap, and sacrifice it to draw a card. Great little graveyard hate card that is also a synergizing artifact. Skull Clamp, gotta have Skull Clamp. 1 mana Marble Diamond, 2 mana for an artifact. It enters the battlefield tapped, and you can tap to add white. So just a little bit of ramp, and it is historic. Nyx Lotus, 4 mana legendary artifact. It enters the battlefield tapped, and you can tap and choose a color and add an amount of mana of that color equal to your devotion to that color. Since we're in mono white, and even though we have a lot of artifacts, this should make a fair bit of mana. Blinkmoth Urn is a 5 mana artifact, and at the beginning of each player's pre-combat main phase, if Blinkmoth Urn is untapped, that player adds colorless for each artifact they control. That might give everyone mana, but it'll give me a lot of mana. Jalum Tome is a 3 mana artifact. You can pay 2 and tap it to draw a card, then discard a card. Card selection, of course, being good, and discarding cards is totally fine. We want to put good targets into the graveyard. Weatherlight is a 4 mana legendary artifact vehicle. When it's a creature, it is a 4/5 and it has crew 3. It's also flying, and when it deals combat damage to a player, you look at the top 5 cards of your library and reveal a historic card from among them. Put it into your hand. Hedron Archive, got more ramp here. This one is signed by the artist Craig J. Spearing. 4 mana artifact that you can tap for 2 colorless mana, or you can pay 2 and sacrifice it to draw 2 cards. So once we don't need the ramp anymore, it's good in a pinch for drawing some cards. Speaking of drawing cards, we have Staff of Nin, 6 mana artifact. At the beginning of your upkeep, draw a card. Tap Staff of Nin deals 1 damage to any target. Soul Talisman, new card from Modern Horizons 2. It's an artifact with Suspend 3 for 1 mana, and you can tap to add 2 colorless, so it's like Suspend Soul Ring. Trading Post, 4 mana for an artifact. This is a lot of stuff. You can pay 1 mana and tap it to do 4 different things. Discard a card, you gain 4 life. Pay 1 life, create a 0/1 goat. Sacrifice a creature, return target artifact from your graveyard to your hand. Or sacrifice an artifact, draw a card. Alright, next up we have Hazoret's Monument, 3 mana legendary artifact. The first line is irrelevant. It says red creature spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. Obviously this is a white deck. But what we do care about is whenever you cast a creature spell, you may discard a card and then draw a card. That's what we want to see. Genesis Chamber, 2 mana artifact. Whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under anyone's control, if Genesis Chamber is untapped, that creature's controller creates a 1/1 colorless mirror artifact creature token. So the hope here, since this is applies to everyone, is that we can make the most out of it with, first of all, a Teshar trigger from Genesis Chamber itself, the ability to sacrifice it if one of our opponents is getting too much value from it, and then we can use those 1/1s with either just to attack, or with Mere Battlesphere to buff it up, or with Skull Clamp to draw cards. Dispeller's Capsule is 1 white mana for an artifact. We can pay 3 and tap it and sacrifice it to destroy an artifact or enchantment. So just having that artifact-based destruction. We have a few instants and sorceries, such as Return to Dust, 4 mana instant. Exile target artifact or enchantment. If you cast this spell during your main phase, you may exile up to 1 other target artifact or enchantment. Disenchant, 2 mana instant, destroy target artifact or enchantment. Brought Back, 2 mana for an instant to choose up to 2 target permanent cards in your graveyard that were put there from the battlefield this turn. Return them to the battlefield tapped. this will probably come up a lot and be very useful. Generous Gift. 2 and a white for an instant. Destroy target permanent. Its controller creates a 3/3 green elephant creature token. Definitely useful for taking care of any type of permanent, including a land. Swords to Plowshares. 1 white for an instant. Exile target creature. Its controller gains life equal to its power. Always good to have for taking care of something scary. We also have Dispatch, which is 1 white for an instant. Tap target creature. However, we will most likely have Metalcraft on, which is if you control 3 or more artifacts, exile that creature, making it even better than Swords to Plowshares for very little setup on our part. Return to the Ranks is a sorcery for X white with Convoke, so we can tap our creatures to pay for X in this case. Return X target creatures with converted mana cost 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. That will probably be a lot. And we also have End Hostilities, a 5 mana board wipe. Destroy all creatures and all permanents attached to creatures. We don't really have too many equipment in this deck, but if a deck does have artifacts or enchantments on creatures, this will get rid of them. Open the Vaults. 4 white, sorcery. Return all artifact and enchantment cards from all graveyards to the battlefield under their owner's control. This of course does benefit everyone, but it should benefit us the most since we're putting a bunch of artifacts into the graveyard. Citywide Bust. 1 white, destroy all creatures with toughness 4 or greater. This should be, if not a one-sided board wipe, at least a, somewhat one-sided board wipe. Most of our creatures are going to have toughness 4, or less than 4 toughness. So this will kill our opponent's big stuff, but will leave us untouched. Similarly, we have Slaughter the Strong for 1 white. Each player chooses any number of creatures with total power 4 or less, then sacrifices all other creatures he or she controls. So we can choose some of our small dudes, and they might not be able to choose nearly as many. Now we have a couple of enchantments. Search the Premises. 3 and a white for an enchantment. Whenever a creature attacks you or a planeswalker you control, investigate. We like our clues here. All that glitters is our only aura. 1 and a white, enchant creature. Enchanted creature gets +1/+1 for each artifact and or enchantment you control. With the right situations, slapping this on Teshar could just mean we knock out an opponent with commander damage, because we'll have so many artifacts and Teshar has flying. Next we have lands. Being a mono white deck with a fair bit of artifact-based ramp, we can afford to have some utility lands and lands that do other things. So we have a lot of those, starting with New Benalia. It enters tapped, but lets you scry 1 and then tap for white. Windbrisk Heights has Hideaway, so it enters tapped, and we look at the top 4 cards of our library and exile 1 face down under this land. You can tap for white mana, and we can pay a white and tap it to play the exiled card for free, but only if we attacked with 3 or more creatures this turn, which should not be a problem. Shevet Dunes helps with that. It is a desert land that taps for colorless. You can pay 1 life to add white, or you can pay 2 white and tap and sacrifice a desert, usually itself, to give creatures +1/+1 until end of turn. Ghost Quarter taps for colorless, or tap and sacrifice it to destroy targeted land. Its controller may search their library for a basic land and put it onto the battlefield. Gyre Reach Sanitarium, legendary land. Tap to add colorless, or pay 2 and tap, and each player draws a card, then discards a card. That helps us filter as well as get cards into our graveyard. Sequestered Stash taps for colorless, and you can pay 4, tap, and sacrifice it to put the top 5 cards of your library into your graveyard. Then you may put an artifact card on top of your library from your graveyard. This is certainly desperation mode, but it's always good to have a way to deal with things and potentially get some cards back that are very important. Secluded Step enters tapped, taps for white, and it has cycling for 1 white. So we can discard this card to draw a card. Memorial to Glory enters tapped, and you can tap for white. Or you can pay 3, tap it, and sacrifice it to create 2 1/1 soldier tokens. So once again, just a way to get creatures in a pinch. Drifting Meadow enters tapped, taps for white, and cycles for 2 generic mana. Self-Hearing Void. I love this card. When it enters the battlefield, scry 1, and it taps for colorless. And it comes in untapped. Hostile Desert. Yes, we do have one other desert. This being it. It taps for colorless, or pay 2 and exile a land from your graveyard, and it becomes a 3/4 elemental creature until end of turn. So, just a way to turn a land into a creature. It can definitely be useful. Considering this is a mono white deck, we need as many outs and things to do in a pinch as possible. Buried Ruin taps for colorless, and you can pay 2, tap, and sacrifice it to return target artifact card from your graveyard to your hand. Can be very helpful. Darksteel Citadel is an artifact land with indestructible, and you can tap it to add colorless. Shrine of the Forsaken Gods taps to add 1 colorless, or you can tap to add 2 colorless, but only spending this to cast colorless spells, and only if you control 7 or more lands, which should not be terribly difficult in this deck. Nephalia Academy. If a spell or ability an opponent controls causes you to discard a card, you may reveal that card and put it on top of your library instead of putting it anywhere else. Tap to add colorless. Not sure how often that'll come up, but being monocolored and having a lot of artifacts, we can afford to have some colorless utility lands like Nephalia Academy. Phyrexia's Core taps for colorless, and we can pay 1, tap, and sacrifice an artifact to gain 1 life. The life gain is whatever, but sacrificing an artifact will be helpful. Tomb of the Spirit Dragon. Tap to add 1 colorless, or pay 2, tap, and you gain 1 life for each colorless creature you control. We'll probably control a few, so this can gain us a lot of life and help stabilize. Plus, we don't sack it, so we could do it multiple times during the game. Guildless Commons enters tapped, and when it enters the battlefield, return a land you control to its owner's hand. Tap to add 2 colorless. So this is kind of like the bounce lands from Ravnica, except colorless, which I think is kind of fun. And then we have Plains. How many do we have? We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 planes, leaving us with a fun list of 99 cards to play with. So that is Teshar, Ancestor's Apostle, a fun and unusual commander. I have never really heard of anyone making a Teshar deck, but boy, is he fun. I really enjoy this deck, and I hope that you enjoyed this deck. If you did, let me know in the comments, and I will do more. I have quite a few on my channel if you want to check out some older ones, but they are older, so you may be yelling at your screen, wondering why a card isn't in that deck. I'm pretty happy with this deck list, but if you have any cards you think